The Quake universe is filled with nightmarish creatures and forgotten worlds, but behind it all exists something far worse. An empire of flesh and steel that moved from planet to planet, harvesting life in its pursuit of universal conquest. This was not a union of species, but a conversion, a collective of the conquered, reforged and stripped of identity. The Strogg were not born to coexist. They were built to consume, to evolve, and to turn all living things into parts of their endless machine. What was the origin of this terrifying army? How did they discover humanity? How did they make more units in their army? And what was their ultimate goal? In this video, we explore the lore and story behind the Strogg. Now, where and when do we begin this story? Well, hundreds of years ago on the distant world of Stroggos. This world was once like ours, bountiful in metals, minerals, flora and fauna. As for the dominant species on this world, the Strogg, their origin and how they became what they became is still pretty much shrouded in mystery, but humanity has theories. The first is that the original Strogg species were just like us and relied on technology more and more as their civilization advanced. That was until they became dependent on it and slowly transformed into a world focused on forced evolution through the harvest and technology of other civilizations. The second theory of the origin of the Strogg is rooted in Quake mythology. In the most ancient temples of Stroggos, the Strogg had carved out murals in worship of the witch goddess, an old one of incredible power. The theory is that the original Strogg may have once been a normal humanoid race, transformed into the brutal fusion of metal and flesh they are known for today. The final and most realistic theory is something more simple. Between the northern plains and the southern sea stood the capital city of Cerberon. It was here a palace was constructed with metals and technology, decorated with reds, black, golds and silvers, a place of oppression, cold and large. The center of the Strogg collective and home of their supreme leader, the Macron. The theory is that Stroggos fell into a world war following the rise of a dictator. To secure victory, the population ventured into technological advancement and the use of super soldiers became normal. At the end, however, every civilization was wiped out and all that remained were the super soldiers. All they knew was war, and so they went on to wage war against everybody. Whatever their true origin, the early Strogg pursued two goals, conquest and evolution. While their brightest minds dissected their own biology and that of the native wildlife, the rest stripped the land bare, mining and harvesting resources to build weapons and machines. Over time, the fumes from Strogg factories and refineries turned the land beyond their cities into a toxic wasteland. Decades passed, and the creatures that escaped Strogg capture twisted to survive the hostile environment. Geks, mutants, and barracuda sharks, amongst many others, rose as apex predators, changing further as the world around them grew more hostile. Across the smog-choked world of Stroggos, vast underground pipelines stretched for miles, carrying materials from place to place. Nothing was wasted. Everything served a purpose. With Strogg signs in full flow, the population focused on efficiency to keep going. To power their war machine, they mined stadium. Armored bunkers littered the landscape. From factories came new weapons, and from the exploration of their own biology came evolution. They merged themselves with technology to advance their own war capabilities. This would have been incredibly painful, but the Strogg cared only for their goal. Icaruses were designed as the perfect airborne unit, jetpacks grafted into their flesh. Enforcers served as the ideal ground unit, a chain gun replacing their hand. Berserkers were created to crush stronger forces with tough armor armed with a blade and hammer. Each soldier in the Strogg army was built as a living weapon, one cog in a greater war machine. They did not care about pain, they cared only about conquest, and as their technology advanced, their forced evolution grew ever more creative. With such a massive operation in motion, the Strogg built a hierarchy to keep control. Each region of the planet fell under the rule of a warlord, and above them all sat the supreme leader, the Macron, in his palace in Cerberon. Among a species born for war, the leader always rose from the strongest of the warlords. The Strogg had learned everything they could about their world, and through their advancement in technology, they looked to the stars to see what else was out there to harvest and study. The universe offered the Strogg an opportunity to expand their collective, and they took full advantage of this. With their war fleets, they invaded worlds with their vast armies and extracted both the natural resources and the biological life that resided there. These minerals and metals allowed them to forge new outposts, freighters, factories, weapons, armor, vehicles, and facility. The life they found, however, was not seen as life. It was seen as something to be experimented on. Anything biological was subjected to study, and then either Stroggification or Stroggifcation. Everything was a resource, nothing was wasted. From large alien life to small, the Strogg studied the anatomy of the civilizations they captured. They tore them apart, put them back together again, and utilized nanites into their bodies to heal them. Beating hearts were used in Stroggos' underground systems, a way to push resources through the pipes. Torsos were installed into energy ports and used to power machinery, and some captives were even tortured by Strogg scientists just to see how they reacted to pain and how much they could endure before they perished. Having become a fusion of metal and flesh, the Strogg themselves could not reproduce in the traditional sense. They instead utilized the same tactics they had done to the population of their own world to increase their numbers. The surgical process of Stroggification was brutal. Factories were constructed with the sole purpose of converting captives into the best war version of themselves. Each one's biology was studied, and a decision was made as to how they would be best suited in the Strogg army. A colossal arachnid species, similar to that of the earth spider, were transformed into what the Strogg called harvesters. The 50-foot tall creatures had armor grafted onto their skin and had rockets installed onto that. Technicians appear to have once been humanoid, reduced to act as a floating sentry turret. Iron Maidens once again appear to have been a humanoid species, turned into a living, deadly weapon. Each conquered species required their own process of Stroggification to unlock their true potential, and these factories simply worked like an assembly line. The prisoners were aware of every change made to their bodies, without pain management, just new units in the Strogg army. Every world offered the Strogg the opportunity to add new units to their ever-growing army. But what about the captives that did not fit their species' Stroggification requirements, or the species that were not seen as valuable at all? Well, the Strogg had bypassed traditional healing and nutritional intake at this point through their extreme mutilation of their flesh. To sustain them all and treat them medically, through Strogg science, they had developed a renewable biological fuel, Stroyant. This substance was as revolting as it was valuable and useful to the collective. But how is it created? For the body parts of their captives that were not deemed worthy of Stroggification, biomachinery, or study, they were collected, broken down, and treated with chemicals until it became a slime form. This vat of pure protein and nutrients was then fed to a large, partially Stroggified creature they called the Stroyant Processing Creature. This poor beast was treated simply as a machine to process the raw stroint fed to it until its organs refined the substance into stroint. From there, the vast pipe systems carried the substance across Stroggos for use. It was stored in facilities, kept in medical terminals, and used for anything that required healing or nourishment. The Stroint processing creature was used to generate Stroint in mass. The Strogg, however, did have the ability to generate the substance on a smaller scale if they really needed to when on another world through the transformation of refineries. This terrifying soulless fusion of decaying flesh, bones, and metal had grown stronger with every war. Each world offered them new resources to work with and new regions to explore. But still, the heart of their collective remained on Stroggos. Through their exploration of space, the Strogg had encountered many civilizations, ripped them apart, and used the pieces to enhance themselves. Their focus on conquest was formidable, but they were also highly intelligent. The Macron commanded every Strogg unit from his palace in Cerbron, but how did his will have so much reach? Why did the species converted into Strogg obey his commands? Through their science, the Strogg had transformed the brain of a massive creature into a living processor, capable of managing endless commands, thoughts, and strategies. From this nexus, data signals spread across the system through vast relay structures known as tetranodes, which connected to the neurocyte chips implanted in Stroggified creatures during their transformation. The Nexus became the brain of the Strogg Empire, the tetranodes its nervous system, and the Strogg unit its limbs and weapons, all bound together within a multi-planetary hive mind. In order to reach other worlds quickly, Strogg scientists explored teleportation technology, and through their manipulation of black holes, they developed slipgates. However, the issue they had was that an entrance had to have an exit. To make this technology useful for the goal of universal conquest, they had to put the exit in place first before they could send an army through. Over time, they would have established a network of slipgates to explore the system further and further away. The world of Stroggos became a fortress of industrial horror, with large weapons built to defend the planet if another species decided to attack. Data brains were sent on missions to oversee the construction of Strogg facilities on new worlds, while research into dark matter was used to develop fatal weapons. Each unit was given or fitted with a blaster, nail gun, machine gun, and more. Oppressors, technicians, and constructors were just three of many units in this army, and as the collective ventured deeper into space, they encountered more species to claim. Yet, not every conflict was simple. At one point, the Strogg encountered the Grease. Little is known about them, only that they too were a species driven by conquest. During their war, the Strogg captured millions of Grease and forced them through the Stroggification process, creating countless new units for their ever-growing army. Strogg technology was never just a tool for war. It was the essence of their existence. Every creation, from the smallest implant to the largest slipgate, served the same purpose: to expand the collective, perfect the machine, and erase the line between life and industry. Many systems away in the galaxy, another civilization grew, unaware of the horrors that had unfolded far across the stars. It was in the 1990s on Earth, deep underground in the Cornidus Transport Research Complex, that the head scientist, Dr. Wendell Gilman, and his team ventured into many fascinating branches of scientific endeavor. Through his experiments, Gilman succeeded in developing a working slipgate and began to discover new worlds. While many of these gateways opened into the cosmic horrors of the Quake realms, one of them led to a world occupied by the Strogg. Ever the opportunist, eager to expand his understanding of the universe, Gilman used their technology to enhance his own. He upgraded his slipgates to match the Stroggs, and after leaving their world, he used this teleportation network to maintain connections between Earth and specific Quake realms. Although Gilman had closed the door between Earth and the Strogg-occupied world, the Collective was aware of his intrusion and of his theft of their technology. His actions revealed two things to the Strogg: that another civilization existed, and more crucially, where it was located in the galaxy. And so, the Strogg dispatched a small fleet equipped with a space slipgate, bound for Earth. It was around 75 years later, in 2065, that the Strogg slipgate arrived in Earth's system. They studied the local worlds colonized by humanity and then activated the slipgate. From it came a large Strogg fleet. They attacked Mars, took down space stations, and then sent units to different regions of Earth. Each division under the control of the Strogg hive mind had different objectives to ensure this was another smooth harvest. In Sudan, they adapted an oil refinery into a Stroggant production site. In Algeria, they established a slipgate to ensure a constant flow of reinforcements. In Yosemite Valley, California, they poisoned the water supply to render the population docile so the region could be seized with minimal resistance. In their ranks for this assault, aggressors were deployed in vast numbers to eradicate human resistance. Constructors supported the advance with repair drones, maintaining weapons and fortifications. Infiltrators breached security systems to grant access, while oppressors coordinated artillery and orbital strikes. Technicians moved across the battlefield, using Stroggant to restore fallen allies. All of them acted under the dominion of the Strogg hive mind, directed through the Nexus. On the grand scale of the galaxy, this was likely only one of countless wars the Nexus coordinated simultaneously. What the Strogg did not anticipate was the resilience of humanity. At first, the Global Defense Force believed the invaders had come to harvest Earth's natural resources. But when millions were seized and dragged through slipgates, they realized the true horror of their situation. They were also a resource. In this desperate situation, the humans fought back, studied Strogg technology to enhance their own, and then took down Stroggant plants, deactivated slipgates, and reverse-engineered their weapons. For years, the Strogg attempted to place new slipgates and harvest every resource Earth had to offer, but as their numbers Earthside dwindled, they closed the gateway between worlds and moved their yield to be processed. The Strogg had claimed millions of humans in this harvest, but unknown to them, they had created an enemy, one that would not back down. The resistance displayed by humanity was unlike anything the Strogg had encountered before. Despite the brutal war, the harvest had yielded millions of humanoids to experiment on, study, convert into new Strogg units, or break down into Stroggants. For years, the Strogg continued their harvest and prepared for another assault on Earth to claim what remained. What they did not anticipate was an attack on their own worlds. The ruins of Earth had long expected the Strogg to return, and through the analysis of abandoned Strogg technology such as slipgates, data brains, and weapons, humanity learned about the Strogg hierarchy, the Macron who led them, and most importantly, how their slipgates worked. The human assault on Stroggos was a preemptive strike, intended to prevent another invasion in the future. The brave volunteers of the Space Marine Corps knew there was a chance they would never return home. Their ultimate objective was to assassinate the Macron. If they could accomplish this, the Space Marine Corps believed Stroggos would descend into chaos as its warlords fought for control. As the Marines were loaded into their drop pods, they were briefed on the remainder of their mission. They were to establish a communication uplink upon the arrival on Stroggos, destroy the planetary defense system, specifically the big gun that shot down incoming forces, and disable the interplanetary gateways to sever the Strogg connection to Earth. If they succeeded, their world would finally be free from the invaders' reach. The Strogg, of course, had no knowledge of the humans' plan, but they were always prepared. As they watched the drop pods eject from the capital ships, they activated the big gun. 95% of the human drop pods were destroyed within seconds. Meanwhile, Stroggos also activated their gravity well to trap all of the human capital ships in orbit. For the remaining 5% who survived, Strogg forces were dispatched to eliminate them. Over the following hours, Marine Bitterman fought his way across Stroggos, established a communications uplink, destroyed the big gun, disabled Stroggos' connection to Earth, and made his way to the palace in Cerberon. In a fierce battle between the human and the Macron, the Strogg supreme leader fell. Elsewhere, Marine Stepchild survived an onslaught of Strogg forces and destroyed the gravity well with an antimatter bomb, while Marine Joker battled his way to Stroggos' moon and overloaded the main reactor. This action destroyed a Strogg fleet as it prepared to attack. Only 3 humans had slipped through the Strogg net and survived, but these 3 had inflicted catastrophic damage upon the Strogg system. The Strogg had lost their leader, their counterattack force, and several key components of their defense network. Operation Alien Overlord was a success, but it was not the victory humanity believed it to be. The human assault on Stroggos was something the Strogg had not encountered before. Another species had invaded their world, massacred their forces, and killed their leader, but they did not dwell on their loss. The Strogg did not rule their collective through emotion. It was simply strategy and what best served their future. The Macron was dead, but the Nexus still controlled every Strogg force, and while humanity had believed a battle between the warlords would throw Stroggos into chaos, it did not. A new Macron was selected, and it once again worked with the Nexus to guide their empire. Every day, the Space Marine Corps learned more about their enemy through captured technology, intercepted communications, and fallen Strogg forces. They quickly realized how resilient the Strogg were, and that a new Macron had already been chosen. The Strogg Collective functioned as a machine that thrived on the war, and humanity believed they would have to strike again to end the threat completely. Through their proximity to Stroggos, humanity devised a new plan. They knew that the Strogg were commanded through a hive mind, with signals transmitted from the tetranodes scattered across the planet. With Stroggos' planetary defenses weakened by Bitterman and Joker's actions, Rhino Squad was deployed under Operation Advantage. Their operation was to deactivate one of these tetranodes using an EMP bomb. Doing so would free all Strogg forces within its range from the control of the Nexus. Through their conflict with Rhino Squad, the Strogg quickly discovered the humans' objective. To stop them, the new Macron waited at the Tetranode's control system and killed as many intruders as possible. Among them was Corporal Matthew Kane. This human had proven to be a formidable enemy of the Strogg, and there was no fate more fitting for him than to become one of them. With a single strike, the human was knocked unconscious by the Macron and taken to a Stroggification facility for enhancement. At this point, humanity had no understanding of what truly happened to those captured by Strogg forces, but Kane was about to witness it first hand. The Stroggification of any species was an art form, a process to be mastered in order to create the perfect cog in the Strogg war machine. From the network guardian to the scientist to the parasite, their methods have been refined through centuries of assembly line precision. But what did this look like for a human? When Corporal Matthew Kane awoke, he found himself strapped tightly into a containment unit, stripped down to his underwear. This marked the beginning of the brutal surgical Stroggification procedure, and each step would be so much more horrific than the last. The Strogg needed their captives to survive the entire procedure. So, the first step was the injection of steroids and a nanite colony into the cardiopulmonary system. This boosted the heart and lungs' natural capacity to endure what was to come. The injection was delivered through a large needle, and without any form of pain relief, the victim felt every moment of agony. When required, the scientist overseeing this stage would descend to the convert and manually begin the process of facial mutilation. Blood scattered the walls as each person was subjected to absolute terror. The Strogg required resilient soldiers to fight for them. Humanity had proven capable in battle, but their flesh was weak and imperfect. To correct this, each prisoner was restrained and subjected to a worn industrial saw. Their legs were severed cleanly, just like a blade cuts through wood. Many lost consciousness at this stage to pain, though the injected steroids forced their hearts to keep beating faster and faster. In place of their legs, mechanical replacements were driven into the exposed bone and fused with the remaining tissue. Across the rest of the body, protective metal plates were grafted directly into the flesh. Once stripped bare, the lower face, chest, arms, hands, and abdomen were now encased in armor. The procedure was unspeakably painful, yet to the Strogg, it was a necessary improvement. The human body had been made faster, stronger, and resistant to most conventional weapons. By this stage, the transformation was nearly complete. The body had been reforged, but the mind still resisted. To finish the conversion, each captive was injected with a massive hypodermic needle that pierced directly into the cerebellum. The cerebellum controlled balance, movement, and much of the body's coordination. It was here the neurocyte was installed. Once in place, the neurocyte assumed control of these functions and gradually seized command of the host's entire nervous system. It linked directly to the nexus through tetranode centers. Through this link, the human's consciousness was overwhelmed by Strogg data, their language, tactical information, system access, and more. When both body and mind had been reshaped, the new Strogg unit was placed in a fluid tank to stabilize and await activation, like a machine waiting to be turned on. These tanks were later transported to the registration center. Many captives still held fragments of thought, emotion, or the faint hope of escape. But that ended when the registration laser passed over them and activated the neurocyte chip. Once the Nexus took control, what remained of their humanity was gone. Their memories, desires, and instincts were frozen. They simply awaited orders from the Nexus and the Macron. Corporal Matthew Kane endured the same Stroggification process, but his team reached him before his neurocyte could be activated. The Macron had intended to turn him into another soldier for the Collective, a weapon it could control. Instead, through its own creation, it made something far more dangerous. Kane was Strogg in body but human in mind, a thinking being with access to every system, every command, and every secret that the Strogg possessed. Operation Advantage had failed after Matthew Kane had been captured by the Macron. But with access to Strogg systems, the human had a greater advantage. They could access the Nexus through Kane, but there was work to be done first. Despite their best efforts to stop them, the Strogg's attempts to wipe out the intruders on Stroggos failed every time. Kane shut down the data storage, data processing, and data networking systems with his Strogg console permissions. Even with their deployment of the Network Guardian, the Strogg suffered another failure. Every action Matthew Kane took offered a real threat to the very foundation of the Strogg infrastructure. With the teleportation system reactivated, Kane teleported himself directly to the Nexus core. Realizing the scale of the threat, the Macron also descended to the core. In the battle that followed, a Stroggified human fought for the future of his world against the leader of the Strogg, and just like his predecessor, the Macron fell at the hands of a human. The fall of another Macron left the Strogg collective weaker, but that was not the goal of Operation Last Hope. The Nexus summoned in Strogg units to defend itself against the invader, but at this point, nothing was going to get in the way of Kane. With a final blow, Corporal Matthew Kane destroyed the Nexus, the brain of the hive mind. And then, everything went quiet. The fall of the Nexus was a major blow for the Strogg. Their empire had risen over centuries through forced evolution, a hive mind of progress, hard work, and suffering. The neurocyte chips implanted into every Strogg unit relied on the Nexus to give them commands, but without it, each unit was free. An entire empire was on the verge of collapse because a human had managed to access the Nexus and killed their Macron. As of now, it is unclear what happened to the Strogg, Stroggos, and their victims. That part of the story has not been told yet. But when Kane returned to the USS Hannibal, he was informed that he had new orders, and then he heard the laugh of something evil. This may have been the voice of a new Macron who had attempted to take over the Nexus network, or something worse. All we can do is wait to find out what happens next. Dr. Wendell Gilman had accidentally alerted the Strogg of humanity's existence, but through that one action, many other worlds have been saved from their goal of universal conquest. As we get closer to Halloween, I really wanted to explore darker topics and themes, and the Strogg is absolutely one of them. The hardest part of putting this video together was that there are so many storylines in the Quake games that I kept getting sidetracked. I did want to explore Quake 2 and Quake 4 stories more, but I had to keep the focus on the Strogg, of how they rose, encountered other worlds, their technology, and their fall. We desperately need another Quake game that follows the events of the fall of the Nexus. As a bit of a Half-Life nerd, I could see the clear similarities between the Combine and the Strogg, of how they moved from world to world and assimilated the life there into living weapons, but what I loved about Quake was that it was the humans who travelled to Stroggos to prevent another assault on Earth. I think the Strogg are worse than the Combine. Anyway, I think I mentioned everything I needed to cover in this longer video, so if you enjoyed this, consider subscribing to the channel. If you liked the video, then feel free to leave a like. If you did not, let me know why in the comments and drop a dislike. I also have some gold tier patrons and channel members to thank for your constant support. Queen Arby, Lewis, Oren X, Drakey Phoenix, Downocal Drawings, 501st Clone Boy, Ruben Mendoza, Imperial Embers, Canifex, Jimsy, Average Soul, Azu, Jonas, Yali Rodriguez, Detroit, Motzi, Brina Lee, Jacqueline Lavelle, King Jack, Lifeblood, Reaper Gaming, Mamet, Kaida Zin, and Zuni115. What is your favourite Quake game? Has the Strogg truly fallen, and what would you like me to cover next? Let me know in the comments below. This is where our story ends. Check back soon for a new one.